Good afternoon, everyone. The list you're about to see before me is a list of my top 5 favorite fruit. A list that I cultivated at the ripe age of 12, and it's gone through an extensive 5-year-long period of groundbreaking longitudinal studies. So let's move on, and primarily I'm here to focus on the number 4, lychees. Since I was a kid, my taste buds have been a slave to this soap berry. And normally when I hyperfixate on certain things for a certain amount of time, I tend to grow bored of it or hate it later on and never return back to it. But this fruit has grown on me. And it has also indeed grown with me through my young adolescent years and to my late teens. By taste alone, I would have easily put it on its first place pedestal. But I've chosen not to, because it has this one fatal flaw that really irks me out, or maybe I could be convinced that it's just a me problem. At first glance, we can never truly identify if the lychee has gone bad or not, or at least I can't. By looking at the photo there, I can't determine if it's actually going to taste sour or bitter unless I unravel the skin on my own and take the first bite. And by then, it's already too late, because now that sour and bitter sweetie taste is stuck in my mouth, and it leaves this very foul aftertaste. And it completely ruins my mood. And the mere sight of lychees starts making me feel sick because it ruins my palate. And I refuse to indulge in it anymore, even though I might have tons of that sweetie goodness left in front of me in my bowl. Furthermore, what happens is now that my mood is ruined, I refuse to indulge in it. And my indulgence is heavily reliant on my mood. So if I'm not going to crave it, I'm not going to want to eat it. Now, let me reiterate on why my personal experience with this insignificant fruit is so remarkable to me. By human nature, we tend to make decisions based on our past. We tend to act a certain way because that is what we're used to based on prior experience. We are all an extension of the traditions and the cultures and the environments we were raised in. And we are also an extension, and we present our traditional moral ideas and the teachings that we have been taught as a kid to the rest of society. Similarly, that's how we tend to react to failures, because our mind, body, and soul are actually tied back to our ancestors and our time on earth. So similarly with failure, what happens is, when the second we make a mistake, we tend to undervalue ourselves and our ability, and it stops us from actually trying to complete this certain task. And now it has remained unfinished, and in many instances, we also tend to stop ourselves from trying something new. We tend to undervalue ourselves and our ability to perform certain tasks based on our private and more personal and previous experiences and failures, as well as many mistakes that we might have made on the past. Now, my basic injustice towards this fruit basically embodies this natural human phenomenon that we face in our day-to-day lives. Because the second we make a mistake, a mass proportion of us tend to get really demotivated. We tend to leave the task unfinished. And now we deprive ourselves of the opportunity of grasping at a new opportunity or a risk that allows us to grow and succeed, because our fear of failure is what holds us back. It's like there's this big rope called motivation, and you're playing tug of war against fatty fear of failure on the other hand, and you're trying to pull it back and forth, trying to get what you can get, and the most of it. So as a result, it's really hard to get out of this enforced mentality that we have put into ourselves, and this cycle of this mentality that we cannot escape. And I won't act like a saint and say this has never happened to me before. It indeed has, in many instances. I perceive myself as a perfectionist, especially in what I do and mainly my hobbies. I set these really high, unrealistic standards of myself, and the second I don't meet them by a certain amount of time, I tend to really start degrading myself and my ability. I start questioning if I'm good enough or not anymore, even though it is completely unrelated and it's really degrading to our mental health. As a result, it has also been expressed through my paintings. When I used to paint, and if I saw any physical mistake in my artwork, I used to just stop there, tear the whole thing apart, and throw it in the bin. I never got back to it. And now it's actually been 3 years since I last took a paintbrush and actually completed an entire painting that I was satisfied with. And as a result, I call this my art block. So Batool, how do we overcome this occurrence in our lives? How do we make sure it doesn't happen again? I mean, it's not like ultimately us humans can avoid all mistakes. That's not possible, is it? I mean, none of us are perfect. So what do? How can we instill a system that allows us to take risks without the fear of failure holding us back? This is where my lychee theory comes along. And there are 3 phases to this theory. So audience, please close your eyes and imagine that there's this juicy bowl of lychees in front of you. Ooh, my mouth's already watering, regardless. Imagine that each singular lychee is a symbolic and an embodiment of a lifetime supply's worth of opportunities, and each one leading to a different outcome, and each one leading to a different life lesson to be learned along the way. So here we commence the first phase, which is the peel. Regularly, it is our fear of failure that holds us back from trying, right? And ultimately, it's what that stops us from trying new things because we already failed at something before. So now, this is where the catch comes along. You can never truly anticipate the ending from just the skin. You need to unravel the skin and peel it open and take the first bite. So that is why, when an opportunity comes along your way to try something new and learn something about yourself, take it. Take it while you still can, because that opportunity is not going to come again. It's a once-in-a-lifetime situation. And you're going to regret it later on when you realize that I should have tried to begin with. It's not like money's coming out of your pocket for doing this, right? And in many instances, this graph that I showed before you is a physical representation of the inverse relationship between fear of failure and motivation. And what's ironic here is that fear is actually good for you. It shows that you care. It shows that you're willing to put in the effort and time into making sure the thing you're scared of is not going to happen again. But then there's this other flip side to the coin, where the fear is so magnanimous that it eats you alive and it keeps you frozen. So instead of a fight or flight response, you're just standing there frozen while everyone else is progressing ahead of you. And you're just there sticking and left with the consequences of your own actions. Then we commence to the second phase, which is the first bite. Now, normally, we can't really tell if the lychee is rotten or not by just a small teensy-weensy bite. That is only because normally when you take the first bite of a lychee, it tastes sweet. But that sudden bitter and sour taste just explodes in your mouth and leaves you in a whiplash situation. So that is why you shove the whole thing in your mouth and start chewing. It's like a leap of faith phase. So similarly, when you start out a new task, start off by actually putting all your energy and invest your energy into completing it, and also completing it to your best degree. This way, don't try to skip the steps and try to find the easier way out. Because quite frankly, one piece of advice, there's no easier way. You can't jump from level 1 directly to a level 100. You have to go through all the stages in between. You might get a perk at level 57 telling you to skip 3 steps and go to level 60, but that's all you're going to get. So don't get your hopes up. But this is where the catch comes along. What if I got a bad lychee? What if I made a mistake? Now my task is going to remain unfinished because I can't undo that said mistake. So this is where the Hemingway effect takes place. This is where there's a positive effect on motivation from the incompletion of a certain task. That is only if you play your cards right. Because life is all but a big game of poker, ladies and gentlemen. You have to gamble against the odds, and you never know what's in your future ahead of you. So now, here, there was a study that was actually proposed that studied the psychoanalytic behavior of undergraduate students when completing a certain task. And there it was outlined that their motivation tended to increase the closer they were to completing that set task. And a more commonly recognized fundamental form of failure is actually the inability to complete a task, where the person that was set to complete it was not able to meet the set standard form of completion. This can be tied back to the deficiency of the task itself or the person that is completing it. As a result, what happens is that you are cut short, and now your motivation is at an all-time null. And in many instances, what happens is that when you start out something new, you stop there, and it's a whole big debacle in your mind, and it's entirely confusing. So, and this whole theory is actually based on the fact of Ernest Hemingway, because of a question he was asked in an interview of how much do you write in a day? And he said, the best way to stop writing is to stop writing when you know exactly what's going on next, and when you know you're going good. This way, you're never going to stop writing a novel. In broader terms, he basically explains that 2 needs need to be met in order to avoid failure. One of the tasks are equally as challenging for you, and 2, the person that is set to complete it, they're close to completion, and it is within his or her realm of completion. So the graph you see before me is actually a graph that physically represents the life cycle of a person when they take on a new opportunity. When your motivation is an all-time null, that means your fear is so magnanimous you don't want to try anymore. So you don't even get past phase 1. That is where your level of success is at its lowest. Then you go into phase 2, which is the experimentation. When you get past that, you're trying to figure out the ground play here. Did I get a good or a bad lychee? You tell me. And then your level of success tends to increase, but then there's a sudden dip. That is when you got the bad lychee. Now what are you going to do? You're stuck there. And now many people actually tend to get demotivated and stop there themselves. And that is the incompletion. But now we tend to forget that the Hemingway effect actually increases your motivation. So when your motivation is still continuing to increase, you get the Hemingway effect and it leads to long-term growth. And your level of success tends to increase. And this is all because Zygarnik proposed that participants tend to remember tasks that were previously left unfinished, and Ovsyankina proposed that participants tend to have a larger tendency to complete tasks when they were actually unfinished, because they had this inherent pressure within themselves to actually complete it as a form of closure. And a very common thing is that yesterday I did my bio paper 1 exam, and the day before that I told myself that I would complete these 2 past papers. And instead of doing that, I decided to clean my room. I decided to actually organize my dad's business cards in order of chronological order and alphabetical order with color theory. And I also decided to help my mom in the kitchen, even though I'm completely useless in there. There was no point in me going in there. And then when I came back, I realized that I was 10 times more productive in actually solving those papers and actually retaining my information. That is why Ovsyankina actually proposed that people tend to stray away from their main tasks and come back to it, and they get more productive either way. Secondly, it is outlined that it has to be equally as challenging for them, meaning one of the main reasons why people might let tasks remain unfinished is because it is over their certain level of performance, or maybe below it. So it's either too challenging or it's too boring. That's why when you're taking on a new task, make sure it is equally as challenging for you in some way, shape, or form, but not in a spot where it's too stressful or demotivating. Make sure there's a realistic set of standards that can be met through achievable means. This is because stress outlined with a positive learning environment tends to lead to positive motivation. The final phase, ladies and gentlemen, full indulgence. Whether you got a good or bad lychee, what matters is you learned something new. And what matters is the journey along the way. And that is what the true meaning of personal growth is. As a society, we actually tend to disregard what the journey is, and we tend to love the final destination. The second we start romanticizing our journey and the efforts we put into it, and we start enjoying what we're doing, that's the time when our level of success will increase, our fear of failure will tend to decrease as well. Because a certain reason why people make mistakes is because they're unprepared for the obstacles. They only believe that I'm going to make money out of this, I'm going to make money out of this. But when they actually have to face certain obstacles in their life, they're completely unprepared because they haven't actually thought of that idea yet. So that is why that risk you are afraid to take, make sure the risk you are afraid to take could have easily been the one that was going to change your life for the better. So don't cut yourself short and start falling out because of your past mistakes and failures and start holding yourself accountable for them. And instead, you owe it to yourself to actually build an empowering and healthy environment that allows you to grow. So start moving away from the friends and family that tell you to do something more conventional with your life and belittle you over the way. And instead, surround yourself with people that actually give you love and support even when all the odds are against you. I'm Batool, and thank you for listening to my take on the Lychee theory.